Good afternoon, my name is Olga Lvov. I'm the program coordinator of the Russian Documentary Film Festival in New York. I welcome you to the festival, and I'm so happy to see you all here today. I want to thank DCTV for having us here today as well. It's a great place, I love it here, and I'm very happy that we're having our festival here where there's a community feeling and that we are part of it. Our topic of the discussion today is the documentary filmmaker's prime responsibility, social or artistic. But first of all, I want to introduce our participants. Brad Rothschild is an award-winning producer, director, and writer. Brad produced documentary feature Kinderblock 66, Return to Buchenwald. The film screened at Jerusalem Film Festival and in over 20 festivals in the United States and around the world. Brad also directed the documentary film Three Men about the people who come to New York City to sell Christmas trees every holiday season. And it won the Audience Award at the St. Lawrence International Film Festival. Brad is currently directing a documentary film about a community activist, Tamar Manassi. And now we will see the trailer for this work in progress.
We're on the corner of 75th and Stewart, on the line between Inglewood and Auburn Gresham. My first concern for being here, my major reason for being here is to make sure you don't die. It's to keep you alive. I show up. All you have to do is show up. I show up. And obviously, being a mother in this community once meant something. Hey, how you doing?
How you feeling?
I'm Tamar.
I'm Harrison, Brother Harrison.
How you doing, Harrison?
How you feel?
This will be our third year, June 27th of 2015. Our first day out actually sitting on a block. So my thing is, I'm just sitting here. And hey, if you feel what I'm doing and you rocking with me, come on, come sit down. If not, I understand that too. But I don't try to sell my religion or sell what I want. All I want for you is to not die. Yeah, we think that this is something that we want people to see how easy it is. We want people to see that it's as easy as putting on a couple some pink t-shirts and coming to sit on a corner. We're not driving for miles, we're not spending a ton of money, we're just out here caring. And that's what we want people to know. It's that easy. Anybody can do it.
I want to introduce Paula Rappaport. She's a writer, director, and editor of many award-winning films, a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Foundation Fellowship, and an Emmy nominee. Among Paula's directing works are Family Secret, the story of the discovery of the filmmaker's secret Romanian brother, Broken Meat, portrait of the mad poet Alan, and Writer of O, portrait of the elusive author of the erotic novel. Let us watch the trailer for the Writer of O now.
We were living in New York. I was 13. My sister Jill was 16. She had read in the press about the first American publication of the erotic novel Story of O. She really wanted that book. She insisted that my father buy it for her. That was when I read bits of it in secret, too.
I was born in 1907, so I don't, how does that make? 70 or?
90.
80?
90.
Ah, 90. Good. Good for me. 90. Look at me being 90. Well, thanks me, I haven't quite forgotten what happened when I was young.
Her lover one day takes O for a walk in a section of the city where they never go, the Montsouris Park, the Monceau Park. After they've taken a stroll in the park and have sat together side by side on the edge of a lawn, they notice at one corner of the park, at an intersection where there are never any taxis, a car which, because of its meter, resembles a taxi. "Get in," he says. She gets in. He says, "Your bag's in the way, let me have it." He adds, "You also have on too many clothes. Unfasten your garter belt and take off your panties." That's easy enough.
And David Sandler is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and cinematographer whose films have screened at Sundance, Tribeca, Full Frame, and have been distributed by Netflix, the Sundance Channel, and Sony Pictures. His most recent documentary feature, My Own Man, premiered at 2014 Tribeca Film Festival and was acquired by Netflix as Netflix original documentary. Here's the trailer for this.
I'm turning 40, and I'm becoming a father.
You are having a little boy.
I'm terrified. Being a father to a son means bringing a boy into manhood. But I'm a guy who can't stand up for himself.
You're a bit of a pansy.
Who can't hold his own. And I don't want to be that guy anymore. What do you think it'll take for me to get there?
I don't think you ever will.
This is my father. If he's ever doubted how to be a man, he's not shared it with me.
Jesus Christ. You don't think about growing up and being a man, you just do it.
In our circle of friends, you and I were the least inclined toward what I would call like macho behavior.
Why don't we just put the umbrella down, seriously?
I need it.
You don't need it, it's hardly raining, it's in the way.
If this equipment stops working because of the rain, you know who's going to get blamed.
Yeah, you picked a bad day.
I needed to do something indisputably masculine.
That doesn't make you a man.
Thing hit me in the forehead.
Has this ever happened to anyone you were teaching shooting?
No. Will experience bring you any closer to what you're trying to find or feel?
I simply don't know.
If you're not looking outside of yourself for approval, it changes everything.
That's you being a great man.
All I can say is just be you.
And Micah Fink, an award-winning director and producer. His films aired on PBS and HBO. His film The Abominable Crime, about gay people in Jamaica, won an Amnesty International Human Rights Award. He also produced investigative films about their Japanese military, Muslim women wearing the veil in France, and the spread of the avian flu virus in Vietnam for PBS Wide Angle, and films for CNN and National Geographic Explorer. His work has been recognized with 3 Emmy nominations. One of his recent films is called Beyond Borders. It's a story about undocumented Mexican Americans, which aired on PBS. Let's watch the trailer now.
My biggest fear when I started working on Wall Street was that someone was going to realize that my papers were fake and that the whole thing was going to be over. My biggest secret, of course, was that I was undocumented.
Y tengo 12 años viviendo aquí.
No soy nacido aquí, pero me considero parte de Alabama. Mis hijas son ciudadanas americanas.
Y les dijimos, era probable que nos arrestaras. probablemente que tu papi o yo no podamos regresar un día.
Yo estaba deportada y al ir a visitar a mis hijos al muro siento como si estuviera en una jaula, me siento como un animal. Mucho. Yo creo que tiene que haber un cambio pronto en las leyes porque se están destruyendo familias, se están destruyendo vidas. Quisiera correr, quisiera volar, quisiera cruzar ese mar.
So let me repeat the question of our discussion, the documentary filmmaker's prime responsibility, social or artistic. Why I have chosen this topic? Because I think that there isn't enough open discussion happening about this in the industry, and while filmmakers love talking about it behind the closed doors and complaining about not being heard and about different expectations they have. So I hope that our today's dialogue is sincere about our paths in filmmaking and honest. And let me start by asking our wonderful participants today, what drives you in the first place? Social responsibility to cover the story, the topic, to make people know about the issue, or the cinephile desire to make films, to make art? I know it's not a simple question, it's not a simple answer, but I believe every filmmaker in their heart knows what is the main personal drive. So what is it for you? Who wants to begin?
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
I've thought a lot about it since I think it's a fantastic question, Olga. For me, I think it's not exactly. I mean, my knee-jerk reaction to it was artistic, not social. Damn it. Because I've always felt that way, and in film school, I went to NYU, I never even wanted to take the documentary class, because I would see these films come out of it with these unattractive people and boring subjects that just did not move me at all. And I idiotically never even took George Stoney's class. He was a major figure in American documentary. But for me, I think it's if I'm captivated by a person, and I was very captivated by Pauline Réage in her book, and then Dominique Ory, which was her name through life, even though that wasn't her original name, because there were like layers and layers of onion about her. But I feel like the world of documentary, I think, has gotten so much better because I think there's been a lot more merging of the two. So a lot of films that do have a social heart to them are done in much more aesthetic ways now. They're more entertaining, they're more beautiful, they're more moving. But so it's gotten much, much better. I think the division has shrunken a lot in the last years. But for me, it's not exactly aesthetic, it's more emotional. If I'm moved by somebody or their story or a situation and it kind of affects me viscerally, that's what kind of hooks me into something and makes me really want to pursue it.
Micah.
I'll take the other position. Because I came into filmmaking as a journalist. I went to Columbia. I worked as a journalist, as a writer for a while. And I think I sort of fell into film almost accidentally, never really expecting. I thought I was going to read books, is what I would have told you 25 years ago. And I guess for me, and it's funny because we live in such a moment right now where everything feels political to me. Every gesture, every statement, every decision that we make as people, and whether that's American politics in particular, or what I would call global politics when it comes to climate and things like that. I feel like we live in a very fraught moment, and I don't know if it's more fraught now than it would have been 50 years ago or 80 years ago. Maybe it's just a matter of experience. But I feel the stakes are very, very high. And so when I ask myself what I'm doing, I always think that I really hope to have an impact and hope to share something. I just saw the Fred Rogers movie yesterday, and it took me a while. But there was a moment where they were in the congressional hearings. They had this little section, and I think it was Ralph Ellison said that, you know, America is in a state of becoming, and we don't really know ourselves that well, and we don't really understand ourselves so well. And the mission, he said, of PBS at that moment was to help us understand ourselves better so we can make better choices about what we want our future to be. And I guess I feel like that's what I hope in the films that I'm making, that one can create a conversation that allows people to make informed decisions about the kind of country that we're becoming, or the kind of world that we're becoming. And so I think pretty much everything that I try to do has some overt political dimension, because to me, the politics are sort of the matrix in which human experience unfolds. And if you can help to shift or shape that a little bit, I think you can really impact things on a very large scale. And I feel, to me personally, just the last thing I'll say is, I think film is perhaps the most powerful medium we have these days. I think people don't really read that much anymore, or don't read that deeply anymore. And film, for some reason, is the vocabulary of our moment. And so if you can take the political and make it beautiful and make it emotional and find the humanity within it, as Wolfgang does so beautifully, then you can create a vehicle for hopefully for improving the world that we're in.
And to just piggyback off of what both of you are saying, because I think you're both right, when you find that character that speaks to your heart, that is the character that helps you tell the story of the moment, or whatever political moment. And I do think that this is a very political moment that we're in, and probably more than it has been in the last 50 years. Maybe 1968 was the last moment where it was so political, but every decision that people are making feels vital. And like you said, people aren't reading so much. I also think people don't have patience to even watch a 70-minute film anymore. And people are getting their information, you know, these little videos that are 90 seconds long. But you can't convey somebody's story in 90 seconds. You can't have a world opened up to you. And I think that one of the most important things about making documentary films right now, and by focusing on one person's story to tell this much larger story, is that you need to sort of live with that character. You need to delve deeply into the character to understand the bigger picture of the world that we're in right now.
What do you think, David?
Yeah, it's funny, when I got drawn, I thought I'd talk a little about the films that drew me into documentary filmmaking. When I was like anybody else, I was watching, you know, Porky's growing up, or, you know, and not even great films, for the most part. But I got drawn into documentary. I remember the first one was The Life and Times of Harvey Milk. It was like a feature film, an incredibly absorbing character and then as you, all these amazing subsidiary characters, really funny and really moving people around him, and of course the story is incredibly dramatic and tragic. And so it had all the emotional dimensions of a feature film, and I think that's what grabbed me. Also, documentaries can absorb me in sort of the same way. And then as I could understand that documentary can be anything, again I got drawn in by filmmakers like Ross McElwee, who makes these kind of inimitable movies about himself, but really not about himself, but about the world. So the camera becomes a way of just exploring everything. Agnes Varda, The Greeners and I was like another one. Was like, wow, film can be like that. And even a movie like Hoop Dreams, which, you know, is it about poverty in Chicago? And I mean, it's supposed to be, but really you're just absorbed by the characters and this longitudinal story that's told. Again, it had the thing about Steve James, this guy who makes these movies that like he films forever, and so you get so many different acts of a person's life over time in the storytelling. So none of that's political, really. It's really human dramas that teach something that I think is more enduring and timeless. So my aspiration was always to make something that would outlast the moment by not thinking about something particularly of the moment. And which isn't to say that movies about particular moments don't stand the test of time, because there's so many that do. Lots of the ones that we just saw continue to stand the test of time. But anyways, I think the question for me isn't really art or politics, but it's something different. I guess it's a curiosity about. It's funny that you mentioned Ralph Ellison, who is one of my favorite writers, and that statement, we need to understand ourselves better. That film, nonfiction filmmaking is about understanding ourselves. To me, that's not so much political as it is philosophical. And so I think for me, documentary filmmaking ultimately is something more philosophical maybe than political.
I want to ask all of you, did you ever have a problem when you have a film, you have a character that you want to follow, and you're applying for grants, and it's very hard because there's a certain issue that's now like you feel like it's prioritized and it's not what you are trying to make. Can you talk about it? There is this, we all know that this problem exists, right? That there's certain, there's certain topics that get attention now more, and maybe they should, but if you're trying to do something else, it's really hard to get the funding. So can you talk maybe with specific examples of these experiences? Because I think all filmmakers have it, but they don't really, they try not to speak about it too much, and they speak more about the success stories.
How did you get your big grants for your film? Because it amazed me, because that is exactly my kind of movie. I love your film. And but in my experience, it's been very, very hard to get grants for films that aren't topical.
Yeah.
It's
No, it's just the way of grant, right? And as we all know, grant writing isn't the only way to raise money anymore. Thank God. But yeah, for me, I went after ITVS 20 times. I went after all the classic grants, and so for My Own Man, I was trying to say, look, we need to explore the nature of masculinity. We have these old models that don't seem to work very well anymore. What are we becoming? We can't really be our fathers. What can as men? What can we be? And that was where I started. And I thought that was topical, but no one else. No one else reacted exactly that way. And it did end up becoming more of a personal story than a survey film about masculinity or a film about it. What happened? I got into IFP. Do you guys know the IFP film market? Everyone knows that, right? So and most filmmakers show up there and they have 25 meetings in the week. There's 7 meetings, and I had 4 people, literally 4. And I was like, what am I going to do all week? I have 4 meetings, and someone said, well, you should just write people in the booklet, and who are here, and maybe they'll meet with you anyway. And so I was like, that's a great idea. And I wrote this, and one of the people I wrote was this woman who was running the San Francisco, it was called San Francisco Film Society at the time. I think it's changed its name. And for some reason, the topic of masculinity just totally was her thing. And she just was she's like, apply. And so I applied, and she shepherded me through I was like, this is how it's supposed to happen. Just to make, it's not really just it's not a meritocracy. And so my biggest grant was through the Film Society, and that's how I got an editor, was able to hire an editor through getting that grant. And I got the $5,000 INISCA grants kind of initially, just a couple of those type, very small grants.
So it's one person.
But it was one person who loved it, and which doesn't apply to anybody else's situation, unfortunately. But it did kind of, it's given me the confidence, I guess, and also just the tenacity to stick to, somebody out there will listen if you persevere enough. So I think I tried not to get into that complaining mode about it, knowing that I understand why foundations want to fund certain kind of films, because there's I think it's good that they fund those films, but it does make it much harder for us.
Can I just say that funding is the ultimate mystery miracle? I've written a lot of brands, I've raised money in different ways, and every time it seems like a miracle. I mean, every time you don't have any idea that, you know, until somebody actually says, okay, I'm going to give you some money, you don't have any money. So, and so I don't know that it's easier to fund topical film. I mean, it depends on sort of, I guess, my experience is if you can be part of a series or an institution where there's money that exists for making stuff, that when you're on the inside, that's so much easier because they have to spend money to keep making stuff. And that's a very privileged place.
Did you have experience of doing this?
So I was on staff at Wide Angle, which was the PBS International series. And I have to say that was probably some of the happiest years of my life because I got to make a film every year for like 6 years.
Mm.
And there were different topics, and all I had to do was come up with a good idea, and they had the money, which was just like, it was just like a dream.
Oh my God.
And then, you know, since the series ended, sadly, but ever since then, you're struggling. I mean, I think the truth is no matter how many films you make, each one is a new thing, and each one has to have its own. And it's not the same foundations or the same, in my experience, that fund one after another. Right? So I don't know that I don't want to suggest that it's easier if you're making topical films.
Yeah. But even if you are making a topical film, and the film that I'm working on now that we showed the trailer for is about gun violence on the south side of Chicago. And I'm having problems raising money for this, and I'm applying for grants and getting rejected. And so if we talk about something that's topical, violence in America in the inner cities with guns is pretty topical. And I have a character who I have spent more time with than I have with any other character that I've filmed. She's a force of nature, phenomenal. She eats all of the energy in every room that she walks into. And, it's still hard to get money. Mm-hmm. And I agree that there's not one way to get money, and I also think that it is a deep mystery as to how these decisions are made. I applied for one grant where no matter whether you get the grant or not, they're going to give you feedback about it. And I had a phone call for 15 minutes with this woman who talked about all of the great aspects of my application. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, but you told me no. And she's like, well, this is good. And she's like, we're looking at it as she's like, well, this part was good. I'm like, okay, so what is not good? And then it just turns out it's a numbers game. Like, how many films are looking for that same small amount of money? And I guess they can only, they can't give to every worthy film. And, one of you just said it's not a meritocracy necessarily, and, who definitely can help you.
Mm-hmm. Pauline, what about your experience with the current film? Can you talk about what you're making now?
I'm doing a film now about another very interesting woman. A lot of my films have been about women characters, but not all. She's a Paralympic athlete from Belgium who named Marika Vervoort. And a couple of years ago, when she was at the Rio Paralympics, she gave a press conference. This is how I heard about her in the New York Times, where she spoke out about her permission to eventually to have euthanasia when she feels that her life condition is too hard to support. She suffers a lot of pain from a spinal kind of, not congenital, but a condition, fatal condition that she's had for over 20 years, more than half her life. And she found out 10 years ago she was on the verge of committing suicide, or thinking about it. And her therapist said, you don't need to try to commit suicide because, in fact, sometimes a lot of people fail and you might end up a vegetable. You don't want that. But Belgium has these very liberal laws that permit euthanasia. They call it that there, which I found out is a huge problem in fundraising in America, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But so you should meet this guy, Wim Distelmans, who's the head of the Euthanasia Commission in Belgium. So Marika went and met this doctor whom we've now filmed with. And Wolfgang, my husband, has been shooting with me, and thank God for Wolfgang, because I don't know how I'd be doing it without him, but because flying over to Belgium and, it's expensive and hard, but fantastically rewarding. So she met with Distelmans, and he became her personal, euthanasia doctor, and 10 years have passed, and she keeps finding new reasons to keep on living. She's gotten a silver, gold, and bronze medals in the London and Rio Paralympics since then, and she has been a world champion in several other competitions in various sports, but her last main one was wheelchair racing. She became a spokeswoman for Distelmans and this movement, or this, right in Belgium, which is not allowed in most countries around the world. And so she keeps finding, like, somehow having the permission to decide how she's going to die has given her this lease on life, and she's just keeps on keeping on. So a year ago, we met her in December 2016. We started shooting with her. In February, about a year ago, I talked to her. We'd already done a couple of film shoots with her, and she said, "Paula, the pain, it's so bad." She takes morphine and Valium every day, and she said, "I think after my mom's birthday, it's at the end of February, I think I'm going to do it." This is like a year ago. I just can't keep on. I can't keep on. So in February, she got the flu, and her mother, who was only 65 or so, got the flu. And her mother, who was in great shape, perfectly healthy as anybody sitting in this room, nearly died 3 times in the hospital from pneumonia. And suddenly Marika, who was having a lot of mother-daughter issues with her mom, much closer to her father, had to be there for her mother. And she sprang into action, and her mother and she have become much, much closer now. She doesn't bitch and complain about her mother anymore. They're very close. And when we filmed with her, she came to America for the first time last week, and we filmed her at Nike in Portland, Oregon. And she had been invited there. And she said to me, "Paula, the pain is so bad. I think after my mother's birthday in February, I'm going to go through with it." I'm like, and I didn't say, "Marika, you said this to me last year." But she's always finding new things, like this trip to Nike she was so excited to go to this place. They've sponsored her, and anyway, I'm sorry, what was the question?
My question
How
was,
are you funding?
yeah,
about like
your way of funding.
Yeah, well, it's been really shitty so far because, like, I have been applying for grants. I did a whole, for a while, I work as an editor and make money that way, but for a while I was unemployed, and I was spending a lot of time. I have a fantastic assistant, a young woman from Australia, and she was helping me do these grant applications, and we came like very, very close. It was a finalist in 2 major grants. And it was just like that close. So it was either like, wow, you just missed getting $100,000 for this film, which is just like, I wish you hadn't even told me. Right. So I'm paying for it myself. Wolfgang has been contributing his labor. We're getting frequent flyer flights, to Oregon and Belgium when we can, or when we go to Christmas to see the German family, and we drive to Belgium. And Marika, she's so sweet. She goes, "Oh, one of my sponsors, sends me all these lunches every month. Here, have lunch on me." I'm like, "Well, thank you. That's very nice." We stay with friends. So eventually, and then we tried, my assistant Alex Egerking and I went to the Foundation Center. I hear I'm complaining about fundraising, which everyone does. And we spent months, like sending out letters to foundations with like, compassion and choices. Maybe they'll be interested. And then we find out, as I said, euthanasia is a big no-no word. You can only say medical aid in dying.
In the States?
Yeah, in the States. So in Belgium, they say euthanasie. That's the word for it. Here, God forbid you mention that word. You can't even say assisted suicide. It's a no-no. So they don't want to contribute. So we have to find some angel, who just thinks this is like the topic that has got to be funded. But there's so many great filmmakers out there and so many great topics, It's a kind of a crapshoot, and whatever.
You find a great character and you find a great story, and then they take years to make, right? And so by the time you start, where you can say when the film is going to end, and you can say when how it's going to resolve, but often you're funding it a bit yourself, and you're doing it yourself, and you're doing it because you have, you care. I mean, I think that's a dimension of, I wish I were doing it for the money. I wish I had more money, but I wish, so many things. But but I think you have, I think that you do care about these things, and you know, it's a wonderful way to explore something that you're interested in, and then hopefully it gets to the point where you can sell it or recover the costs or, you know, finish it or whatever.
I think everyone on the panel and probably most of the people out there who've made films are doing it because they love it so much. That's like, you really want to do this, and you'll just feel it gives you joy. And if you do manage to finish it, connecting with an audience is so thrilling, and like, it's incredibly rewarding.
I feel like it's almost that you have to make these films. So you meet the character and you say, I have to make this, come hell or high water, and that's why you'll sleep on somebody's couch, and you'll use your frequent flyer miles, and you'll do whatever you have to do to make the movie.
Because these days you have to get it to a point where anybody even is willing to look at it, right? Yeah. I don't think a paper treatment works anymore, right? I think you have to have a character really, you have to have, you know, evidence that you have a real character and that you have access to the character and that that character is doing something interesting. You know, it seems to me that it's shifted to that point. Because I'm in the process of doing that exact now without really having very much money, but enough to do that, and then really hoping that once we have that, then we can start showing it to, oh, please, the Netflix, or, you know, whoever has that big pool of money, or the iTunes or whatever, and that they can come in to help.
When you cover a certain issue and you care about it, do you believe in manipulating the viewer for the right cause? And do you think that filmmakers should give their opponents the voice too? That's the question about subjectivity, objectivity of a documentary. What do you think about that?
I would frame it differently, if I may. So I'm very interested in immigration. Did Beyond Borders, start another project again on immigration now, looking at the dreamers and what's going to happen to them, because they're at this very critical juncture in time and in history, and if they all get kicked out, it's, you know, millions of people who are just going to vanish out of the American system. I think one of the things that for me is almost like a mission statement a little bit is that there are a lot of people that have a lot of power to get their voices out into the world, right? For some reason, I wish I made celebrity films, because celebrity films seem to be easy to sell and they have a market and an audience, and oh my God, if you just follow. But I think to myself, you know, the celebrity is out there already. They have the power, they have the money, they have the access, right? Do I really care so much about what a celebrity thinks about the world? Right? You can make, and I'm not denigrating that, because there are great films that are made that way. But the films that I'm tending to make these days tend to be voices that you don't hear so much. And in the immigration debate, I think there's this wonderful, I think we hear a lot of the dominant voices these days. And what you don't hear is the voices of the people who are really being impacted by the situation in which we are. And so I think you can balance both sides of an issue, and I try to do that as a journalist. I think it's important to know what the two ends of the debate are, but I'm much more interested in the people who are being impacted than I am by the people who are impacting, in terms of who we invest our time with as a character and get to see the world and the lives and the emotional experiences that they're going through. I think those voices tend to be much less heard, and I think there's a real value in hearing those voices.
No, I think that what you said earlier, celebrity documentaries are easy to sell. Like I wish that these, you know, social issue docs would be easier to sell without, you know, Angelina Jolie in it. Mm-hmm. That would be nice. Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Paula, with your experience? What is this?
I can't say. I don't know. I mean, it's encouraging to see that so many interesting documentaries are now available on Amazon and Netflix, and that I didn't realize Netflix had taken My Own Man on. I mean, that's encouraging, but I don't know, it hasn't helped me so far. I don't know. I had French TV funding for a while. I got very, very lucky, and in 2000 I got funding for the film about my Romanian half-brother, and it was just like a stroke of luck that I sent something into someone there that I wanted to do this film, and they happened to be doing a theme evening on family secrets, and it was like it fit right in. And then because the film did very well, they said, oh, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, I'm kind of interested in doing a film on this woman who wrote Story of O. But after she had died, after I met her, she was dead. And when they were like, oh, that's a great idea, and suddenly I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? She's dead, So then I found this great archival footage of her. But anyway, but now, I've pitched several, or proposed, I hate the word pitch, but proposed several ideas to Arte, and they've become more commercial, and like sometimes I've proposed, like I was very interested in Gestalt therapy and studied it for a while, and I've seen things in the Gestalt workshops that are so fantastic. And I remember proposing that to the woman, Natalie Verdier, who was my main contact there. She goes, but Paula, we have to do European subjects. And I'm thinking, who the fuck cares if it's European or American? This stuff transcends everything. Okay, so we'll find some Gestalt group in Paris or something, but it doesn't matter. But, they have like these parameters and whatever, you've got to just somehow get lucky that your thing happens to be exactly what they're looking for at that moment. I don't know. It's like maybe I should start playing the lottery.
We all talked about impact of how you find your audience. How do you measure it?
I was thinking of this question of impact because I think it also relates to this question of a film's political importance and how you define political importance. Because I made My Own Man because I felt like I was going through a kind of, for lack of a better term, masculinity crisis, and felt like there was a lot of other men out there like me who just weren't talking about it. So I thought, oh, there'll be an audience for it. That no television station would define as an audience, but that I thought was an audience. And then I make this film that apparently has no obvious political import, but then because it was on Netflix and all over the world, I got letters from almost every country you can think of, from people for whom it had this incredibly deep significance. And because of the kind of very personal film that it is, I think it tended to elicit very personal, long letter responses to how the film reached them. And it just struck me as like, so here are these people who are being, inspired to make very fundamental changes in their lives, meaning they're going to confront family relationships that they haven't confronted. And is that an apolitical impact? In my mind, there's something that's deeply important about inspiring other people to transform on an individual level. Because of course anybody who talks about politics talks about changing individuals as a way of changing crowds. And so I think you have to sort of stick to your guns about about the vision you see for your film in the world, and not try to take the culture's prevailing understanding of what it means to make political change as your metric. And so, I, of course, totally quixotically saw at the very beginning, I'm going to have an audience, and other men will see their story in mine, and it happened. And by the way, it didn't make me rich or make me popular, or even in that year, no one had heard of my film, even though it was on Netflix, because the way people hear films are through festivals and through broadcasts and other more traditional means still. So I had to tell myself through all the rejection and all the ways I didn't get notoriety of what kind of matters. So I guess that's my answer to this impact question is getting really personal responses to a personal film ended up being the thing that I realized was meaningful, even though I didn't get other things.
Fred, what about your films? The Kinderblock, the film is amazing. What was the experience with how it affected the people?
So we made this film about child survivors of the Buchenwald concentration camp. There was an actual real-world impact by the film, and when we were in the process of making this film, the story was we followed 4 boys back for the 65th anniversary of their liberation from Buchenwald. But the story was about the rescue of young boys in the camp. Within the camp, they were saved and they were protected. And we learned that there was the block elder, the person in charge of them, saved 900 lives. And he had not been recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. And as we were making the film, the idea was well, he should get recognition. He deserves to be recognized. And that became part of the film, but it was only because the film was being made that when we were sitting around a table in Weimar, Germany, and then somebody said, wait, he hasn't been recognized? Like, why not? So he eventually was recognized by Yad Vashem. And then we discovered that he had a grandchild who was living in the United States. And this is somebody who, over the course of the years that we were making the film, we couldn't find a trace of anybody who was connected to him. So after the fact, the granddaughter reached out to the executive producer of the film and said, and she lives in San Diego, and said, you made this film about my grandfather. And now there's a museum for this man in his hometown in the Czech Republic. Mm-hmm. There's another film that was made about him, a shorter film. And we did, in a small way, kind of change the history, at least for this family and for people who understood something about this forgotten human being. But the four boys who were in the film, who were already in their 80s when we were filming, we saw how it transformed their lives to be like these, they were kind of like celebrities almost. Like we have one of our four guys that goes around the world and is kind of recognized now. I mean, he was one of the younger survivors, and now he's one of the last ones left who's still in decent shape mentally and physically, that he can go and travel. So he lives in Israel, and he's always in the newspapers there. He's on TV regularly. He goes to Germany. He goes to...
And that happened after the film?
After the film.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean...
I want to open up for the questions from the audience, please, if you have any.
Thank you. Well, we understand so far you've been talking about the filmmaker's liberty and then the invisible hand of the market, if you like, which is want to choose that which it recognizes already. And it seems to me that it's not just a matter of one topic versus another, or politics versus aesthetics, but the genres which everyone recognizes versus some forms you feel more drawn to personally. But then how often do you confront the following problem when you want to try something new in terms of editing, let's say, or in terms of showing the character's life, but not being able to do it because otherwise it's not going to be recognized by the market, be it the mass market or something very elite, for instance. So would you comment on that, please?
So can you say the question again?
So do you confront this problem of not being able to pursue a new kind of format which attracts you as a filmmaker? Because on the one hand you have some mass genres for TV, on the other hand you have art house, but it also is rigid in many ways in terms of genre. So my question is it a problem for you? I'm not just talking about something very, very artistic. It may be a film about anything, but you want to try some new ways of putting the material together, but you can't.
Yeah, I had very much that experience on the last film that I did with money from Arte in France. It was a commission, and it was a film about Nadia Comaneci, the Romanian gymnast, and the editing, I really like to do kind of far out things in editing, but one of the problems is they give you a very short schedule. I was working with another editor, a young woman, Yen Levin, who's a French citizen. We were editing in Paris, and she's really fast and really smart. So we had like two editorial minds there. We were both editing on the thing. And we had just looked at this film, Red Army. Have you ever seen Red Army? It's like one of my favorite documentaries of recent times. It's, even though I've never seen a hockey game in my life, it's so funny in the editing about this Russian hockey team and you know, where their status in the world. So I showed it to Yen, and she's like, oh my God, I love it, because it was all these great editorial things, funny, really funny. And we were like, we're gonna do this with the Nadia footage, you know? And then Arte kept coming in and saying, no, you can't do that, no, and like nothing.
You were in the process.
Yeah, we were there editing, and for one thing, I mean, they wanted us to show them like a rough cut in 2 weeks. It was crazy, and I'd been working for months in New York. Yeah, an hour long. And so the schedule was insane, and then, you know, they were so. This was the thing about once you get funding from somebody else, if you're not paying for it yourself, or if the funder is not like right in sync with you, you have to sacrifice a lot, you know. And I really felt like Yen and I were being bossed around. And the things that the story's good, and I stand by it. The film is great. I love it, but I think it could have been actually much better in the editing if they had just let us alone, you know, and given me more freedom, you know, to add in certain elements and have more surprising editing, you know. So it was painful. It really was, you know. And it finally works out. Finally, they're like, "Oh yeah, it's great, wonderful. Oh, I got the best ratings of anything on that strand, whatever." But you know, you're like, "Oh yeah, but it was like torture." You know, the edit, it was hard, and I really like editing. You know, I mean, with those moments when you put like some image with some music and you take away the sync sound, it's like, "Oh, this is just great," you know, and it can be so fun. And there were moments like that, but it was hard, and it was totally that thing of giving up your freedom in you know, in exchange for the funding, for the support. And in fact, the film got out to way more people than like other films that I've done on my own, where I show them at festivals and really connect with audience members, but really small numbers of people see it. It got very wide, you know, viewership, and now it's on Amazon, but you know, I don't know. Like when I did Family Secret, which is a very personal story also, I mean, the response from festivals and the letters that I've gotten have been so meaningful to me. You just feel like you're completely connected, and that is the best. I think that to me is the most rewarding.
More questions? Micah, you want to add something?
No, I was going to say a question.
Questions?
Sorry. I was going to add just a small thing to your question, which is making me think of the trailer that I showed you for My Own Man. I thought I made the film I didn't edit the film. I edited it for a long time, but then hired a person who was an actual editor and made it much, much better. But I did still feel like the hubris of but I should be the person that does the trailer, and Netflix just makes the trailer. Like they make the art, they make the trailer, you don't have anything to say over it. And I saw the trailer, and I was like, this is terrible, you know? And people around me were like, no, I think it's probably pretty good, actually. And like, maybe you shouldn't have it. And I just realized, like, I didn't know anything about like a trailer as its own art form, you know? Because it's all about just finding emotion in your material. It's not about content, you know? So because someone just either laughs or cries and they push play, you know, right? And that's the goal. And so I didn't know the art of it. And it was, so it's just a case of, what you were saying really, Paula, made me think of that too, is like sometimes like people with an understanding of what draws audiences in, like having that eye isn't always a compromise. Sometimes it's a help. Yeah.
Craig, you had a question?
Yeah, just in terms of this topic of, on the one hand, you have basically a film report, which some people call the document, and on the other hand, you have something highly personal and maybe even experimental, a loose term, where a very limited audience would want to see it. Somewhere in between, you have something that can be socially responsible and artistic. So without having some overseer crushing your creative impulses, as you work, even if it's a personal film that you might not realize at the time actually is a very political film about maybe what we call toxic masculinity these days, what's the balance that each one of you take between the style and the substance, and between the idea of how many people will I actually be able to reach with this film, because every film has social responsibility.
I don't know that, I mean, maybe you feel differently, all of you, but I don't know that I've ever finished a film to my satisfaction. You know, you just run out of time, whether it needs to be broadcast or you run out of money and you have to be done. And so, you know, it's a beautiful process, right? And it's a wonderful process. And, you know, it's a crazy process. I mean, I think we've all made a lot of different kinds of films. I've had some films that were edited in 12 weeks. Oh my God, right? Now I think about that. And I've had films that have gone on for 2 years, literally, in the edit. And that's a different kind of process. And so, you know, what you can do with time and money is you can be, you know, if you have time for graphics and for animation, I mean, if you can afford that and have the time to do it, you can really do wonderful things. But I think part of the world that I exist in, you know, I have to make a living at it, so people have to keep paying me. So there's a limit to what they'll pay you, so you have to be done in whatever the framework is. So I don't know that there's and I think it also answers your question to some degree. The more time and money you have, the more creative you can be, really.
That's true, but I think, at least for me personally, it's about story. And as long as, if your story is there, then yes, if you have the resources, you can build that up with graphics or whatever. But without the story, then all the money in the world isn't going to fix.
Yeah, you need to have a story.
Isn't going to fix that. But I mean, to me, everything is in service of that, of story.
Well, I think, Greg, your question was also about the material versus style. Like that sometimes you want to do certain things, and I've experienced it recently with the film I was making, that I wanted to do so many experiments, but then the material spoke so strongly itself that I felt I had no right to interrupt it with my directorial input as much as I wanted. Was that your question as well?
Well, that's one point, but also the point of, if you want to reach an audience, how do you reach the audience? Story is important, but documentary story is not that important. Most documentaries have no story. They're just topics. The character that we can somehow feel like, that could be my sister, even if you're of a different tribe. That's always, I think, what reaches people. So I'm actually answering that question.
The emotional connection.
But the question really is, what reaches the audience in your opinion? And is it style? Is it substance? Is it character? Is it, again, I don't think documentaries, hardly any of them have stories. They have situations.
Well.
We're also agreeable, there needs to be some kind of
I think you have to. I think it is story. I mean, I think this is a conversation I think we've had before.
Yes.
I think story is essential. I think without story, you have character, but with a character without story is portrait, and there's a limit to how long that can go on.
Character without a story.
I gotta say, the word story also used to really bother me because everyone's like, the most important thing is story. Story, story, you have nothing. I'm like, I don't know. It's like I used to love movies when I was 5 years old. And I didn't know what was going on. I just loved them, and I was like, Mommy, what's going on? But if you feel like when I was doing Broken Meat about this mad poet, it is a portrait, but it has a shape. It does have a shape, and I had all this amorphous footage of him, but in fact, at one point, he was threatening suicide, and then we're like, gee, how do we end this film? And it's like, he had a lot of trouble, he loved reading, it meant so much to him, and when he's really in crisis, he's like, I can't read, I have no concentration, because he was on various different psychological drugs and stuff. And then at the very end, he left me this message. He goes, Paul, I'm reading again, I picked up my Antonin Artaud, and I'm reading, and that was the end of the movie. It's like, because it was a portrait, but it had a shape, and I kind of like the word shape better than story. I guess it's the same thing in a way, but it's not, well, they're very related. It's the experience that you go through watching something over whatever period of time it is. And if you feel like you've gone on the journey and it wraps up in a way that you like, then that's story.
You feel satisfied.
Yeah, you feel satisfied as a viewer. I mean, maybe not everybody, but people that like the film, and that, to me, is what counts, And story used to seem like fascistic almost. It's like you gotta have a good story.
It's just a cheap trick to keep people interested.
Not cheap.
Are there other questions? Moving on. There's one. Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Rebecca. This question is, as a documentary watcher, when you said what structurally could change that would be good for documentary filmmaking, I thought what could change for me as a documentary viewer was to bring back what was the equivalent of DVD extras. Because after I watched the story and I floated around in the story, I would love to see some of the footage that couldn't make it in when I've heard the struggles of how much comes out of it, how much raw feeling there is.
That's a great point. And I feel like there's so much that gets left out because it just does not fit in with the 70, 80, whatever minutes, or it doesn't fit in with the narrative. I'm going to use the word story. But the outtakes are fantastic of everything, and the stuff that doesn't end up in the film for one reason or a million reasons. Like sometimes it's gold.
Yeah.
this idea of a dichotomy between the artistic and the social. Actually, you're responsible for both as a filmmaker. I guess I just wondered if you could share some examples where you really wrestled with something that, either something was fitting into a beautiful shape, but then your responsibility to the facts meant that you had to break that shape, or stylistically you really wanted something to happen, but your responsibility to the truth, the facts of the story, or the social message just didn't fit together. Ultimately, I think these things are in conflict, but playing out all the time. So I just wondered if you had any examples of that.
I think there's, sometimes a deeper truth that might not be follow the facts, and I don't know, I can't give you a good example, but I think if you are in sync as the maker with the heart of what you're documenting and wanting to make your film about, then that's what counts in terms of the truth. That's why I think the you asked that question about, do you need to show both sides? Mm-hmm. I don't think you do. I think if you, I remember I worked at Maisels a lot, and they were doing a film for HBO on abortion, and it was insisted that both sides be covered. I'm like, how can you, by HBO, I'm like, how can you show these people that are against abortion? It's wrong, And yet they had to do it, and they found some, of course, great people that showed that side of it. But I thought that was terrible that HBO imposed that on them, that they felt for their audience, they had to do it. That was more than 10 years ago. But I don't know. I think if you're, maybe this idea of, doing it as an auteur, or you have to take what really is meaningful to you as the maker, and if you feel truthfully connected to the thing, then that's the key,
Yeah, I'll play the other side of that, which is, coming out of a journalistic tradition, I think it's important that films are, I love films that have creative elements in them. Werner Herzog is God, but
we worship at the same.
Yeah. but for me, I think it's really important that if the documentary purports to be true, that it is true. And that we live in a world of lies right now, and truth is devalued, and creative truth is acceptable at the highest levels. I think that's a corruption of meaning. There was a wonderful analysis that compared the moment we're in right now with that of Weimar Germany, before 1920s, as truth and knowledge is devalued and the political discourse becomes much more emotional, and I think that has a larger cultural impact, and I think we as cultural makers are responsible to keep a clear line as to what is real and what isn't real, what is true and what isn't true. And so my struggles filmically tend to be less about whether it's true or not, because I'm pretty much clear for myself what I'll include. It's more, when does the story end? And so, I made a film that I thought would be done in 9 months, and it ended up taking 6 years to resolve because there wasn't an ending to it. And so it's more about having the patience to be around long enough to have a shape that completes a story that has an end that's satisfying. Mm-hmm. It's not so much about what goes into it as if you're around long enough to tell a story. That's the challenge, and that can be very expensive and time consuming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to clarify, I don't mean showing the other side necessarily, but very often you have a question of an omission in the editing process, right? This person went somewhere, but it just doesn't fit in your story at all that they did this thing. And these questions, I think, come up all the time. And they are a question of being faithful to the truth, and ultimately as a social responsibility. So that was more where I was coming from.
But surely, you can't, I kind of like the first films I did when I was or just got out of film school. They actually were just flash frame to flash frame. I mean, I really loved showing like absolutely everything that was in front of the camera, and didn't want to edit them except, you know, splice flash frame to flash frame. But how, I mean, how can you put everything? So somebody goes somewhere and you omit it, so what? I mean, you have to, otherwise you're just like going around documenting everything and making more like a what do you call it, archival, you know, record of something. And that wouldn't have a shape, you know? And unless you wanted to take total slice of life, almost like I mean, what I loved at that point and still do in a way is experimental film, where you don't adhere to the usual shape of, you know, narrative. And that's great too, but, you know, if you just kind of like, oh, I'll just shoot everything, you know, who the hell wants to look at that, you know? Nobody.
Aristotle says that everything that belongs in a story advances the story, and anything else doesn't belong in the story, and that's how you decide. And, you know, that's different from being inaccurate with your facts, or being inaccurate with the truth, or lying about something, or concealing something that should be in the story, right? I mean, I think that's the definition, and I think it's a pretty good working definition for what goes in and what goes out. Still.
I think it's perfect to end with Aristotle, our discussion. And I encourage you to continue conversation informally. I want to thank our participants for being here today with us. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to share one last thing with you. When I recently met a filmmaker who was going at many festivals with his film, and I said that I was going to have this discussion. And I asked like what he thought about it, and he said, well, I'm going to so many film festivals and I see that there are usually 3 categories of films: good films, bad films, and bad but important films. So I encourage you, we have the festival going on for the full day today. I encourage you to go check out the films till the end of the day. We have both good and important films. So welcome.
Thank you.